Hi, everybody. My name's Blake Cabot. I am the owner of careerlearning.com. And today we have Wendy Sellers, and we're going to be talking about DEI and all sorts of fun HR things. Sorry, ICE, sorry, and what to do about that. And Wendy has got a class coming up on DEI and ICE on April 23rd. So we'll send you a link to that. And we have a code for Professional 20, which will take 20% off of that. So please join us on that. So with that said, uh, I think we are ready to go. There's some resources down below on uh, uh, on one of the resources tab, and so you could download this presentation if you want to. And any questions, please put in the Q&A or chat, and we will get to those. So without further ado, Wendy, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. Whoa, what trying times we're in right now. There seems to be every day we wake up and there's different conflicting news. So I'm going to give you as much information as I possibly can that is relevant. And as of April 16th, which is the day of this recording today, doesn't mean that things won't change tomorrow. So I really encourage you to make sure you're following Career Learning on LinkedIn. Make sure you're checking your email as well. And then, of course, you can follow me too. So again, Wendy Sellers here, the HR lady. I'm an HR consultant and I do a lot of management training. And my question to you is, hey, is your business ready for an ICE visit? And I hope to goodness that you say, no, we don't have to worry about that. But what I really want you to say is, yes, we're ready by the end of this training today. It is not a joke. In the past, ICE visits, would be really only if there was a severe, I don't want to say malpractice, but clear ignoring of the law and hiring people that are not qualified to work in the United States. Now, with the current presidency, they're going to be going after a lot more companies and not just the traditional ones that you would think would hire people that are not allowed to work in the United States. So here's the other thing too is people might be able to live in the United States because of their spouse, family member, some other visa, something like that. But that doesn't mean that they're allowed to work in the United States. So if you don't know anything about, I-9 compliance, I'm going to give you a ton of links today that you can go after this and do some training or self-learning on your own, or you could just come back to our training in a couple weeks. So we're going to talk about I-9 compliance, E-Verify, and what to do if ICE comes calling. In case you don't know, there is a new I-9 form. Now, don't freak out because the other forms are still valid. You could still use them, but why just get rid of them and use the most current one? So there is, if you go to this resource link below, it'll open it up to the I-9 website, and you should go and download the most current one that has an expiration date of 5/31/2027. And so you could also still use the one that is 7/31/2026. So there's a couple different versions that are out there. They didn't just go away and disappear. You could still use them, but definitely make sure you're using one of the most relevant ones. In the new I-9, there are just a few words that they changed on there. It's nothing completely, magnificent changes, but there are little tiny words as they change. More importantly, you need to retain these I-9s. So you need to use the I-9s, even if you're using E-Verify, which we'll talk about in a moment here. But even if you're using the E-Verify system, you still need to have employees complete the I-9, because then you're going to use the information from the I-9 to put into the E-Verify system. If the employee passes through the E-Verify system, you're in the clear. That's the government doing their duty. So I do encourage you, if you're not already using E-Verify, to do that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But look at this last bullet on this slide here is employers have to retain the I-9s for each employee for 3 years. So making sure that 3 years after the date of hire or 1 year after the date of employment ends. Now, if you have a gazillion employees, and that's a lot, right? But if you have hundreds, thousands of employees, you could choose to no longer retain them. I personally, since we do everything, we usually scan everything in and make them into a scannable form or a PDF. Why would you get rid of them? Why would you put yourself up at risk? But if you choose to not retain them, you don't have to by law. I encourage you to retain them so you can go to the government and say, we've done everything that we could based on this I-9 form, and or if you're using the E-Verify system. You do need to know what ID is okay to be used. And so I'm not going to go into the specifics of all of this here because you've done this before. But if you have it and you're new into, wearing the HR hat or the HR role in itself, these are the documents that you have to get from the candidate, the soon to be new hire, to say, here's my ID. Yes, I'm eligible to work in the United States. You either have a document from, list A, B, or C. So B and C, you have to have two documents. List A, you only need to have one document. So if you're not sure 100% where they are, what they are, there is a link right here that will go through every single one of the documents. If somebody, I just know, for example, in list A, there's like a passport. And so if you have a passport, that's all you would need. If you didn't, then you need two documents, one that establishes identity, one that establishes employment authorization. If we have time, I'll show you these links. I don't think we're going to have time, so that's why I've given them to you. Now, the general tips for the I-9 form completion, because that's going to be the thing that ICE asks for. If ICE comes for a raid or an audit, and I'll explain the difference between those two, one of the things they're going to say is, give me all of your I-9s of all your employees. And so you want to make sure that the I-9 is completed. I'm going to tell you, when I was in corporate HR, this was one of the things back in the day that we were like, yeah, this is fine. Yeah, they went to this, they grew up in this country, they went to this college. I'm sure they're legit. Yeah. I'm just going to quickly look at the I-9. Listen, don't believe everything that a new hire tells you or that they show on their resume. And that's for when you're interviewing as well. We have to protect ourselves, meaning us as the company or the company representative. So it needs to be very, very clear that it is serious, that the I-9 is a very serious form. Do not use abbreviations on the form that are not widely understood. I wouldn't use abbreviations at all. You want to think of the I-9 form, especially 2025 and beyond, as something as important and serious as an IRS document. So it should be filled out every single line that is relevant, and don't be using abbreviations. Again, I encourage you to use the most current I-9, but if that's going to take a little while because you have everything in your systems and you got to change out your electronic system where you're sending new hire documentation to the candidates, et cetera, then that's fine. Use the old format because it is still valid for some time, but put it on your to-do list to change out and use the new I-9 form. Again, if I was in corporate HR or one of my clients were getting audited, I want to prove to ICE, hey, the minute you put out this new I-9 form, we changed it. And so we're trying to do our best here. Now, the English version of the form is the only acceptable version, except for in Puerto Rico. So you should be using the English version everywhere else. The Spanish version can be used in Puerto Rico. And then make sure that your employees, or in this case, there may be still candidates, because even though they have a conditional job offer, they haven't completed the new hire paperwork yet. So technically, they're not employees. Just make sure no matter what you're saying to them, that you're being consistent and you're not treating them in a discriminatory manner because you're saying, oh, your ID is not valid. You must be a illegal immigrant. You're going to get yourself in hot water from that. And that's a whole other conversation that we'll be talking about in our upcoming training as well. I do encourage you, if you have any concern right now, if you're going, what, we really don't have the I-9s. We kind of, said, yeah, fine, shove them in a drawer. Or we didn't even use I-9s and nobody's ever verified this. Now is the time to do the self-audit. I'd rather you realize you made a mistake and have been, breaking the law. I'd rather you realize that instead of ICE coming in and realizing that, because there are a lot of fines attached to this. So if you go to this link below that is on this slide, there's all information right from the government itself about how to do a self audit of I-9s and how to correct mistakes. The common mistakes are made by the employee. At that point in time, they're still a candidate. Then if they have a preparer or a translator, so many employees, you as a company might have preparers or translators that you're working with to help, say, an employee who has another primary language other than English and you're not in Puerto Rico. So there's mistakes, common mistakes by the employee, common mistakes by the preparer or translator, and those made by the employer or the employer when you are rehiring. And so it's very important to understand that, a rehire also requires identification, looking at the I-9 again and making sure that you understand, hey, we have to, just because they worked for us in the past doesn't mean that we're able to not just go ahead and, use the old one. And so I'm going to just show you this slide. On that slide is the self-auditing and correcting information. And then you could see here that there's a lot of information here about, what goes right, what goes wrong. And so we won't have time in this 30-minute session today to go over all of these, but they're very, very clear on this website what your responsibilities are, you as the employer, and then all the way down to what are the responsibilities of the employee as well. And then there's a self-auditing and correcting mistakes link too. So you can even go down here to say, all right, what are the forms I should be using, et cetera, and the common mistakes. So these are the common mistakes that I mentioned. You have to click around on that link a little bit here and just find out what are the mistakes. What are they using a different last name? I don't know, a lot of, women particularly may have changed their name during marriage, but other people change their name for other reasons as well. And so please look through each of these common mistakes and make sure that you're not making the mistakes as well, because we don't want you to be getting in trouble with ICE and then unfortunately having to get a fine. So what are the fines? The fines are, anywhere from $272, not a big deal, to $2,701 per violation. So knowingly hiring or employing an unauthorized worker, even though they have the right to live in the United States, doesn't mean they have the right to work in the United States. It could cause a fine for you, the company, anywhere from $676 to over $5,000 per violation. That's a lot. And so if you only get one violation, let's just say they give you, I don't know, a $3,000 violation. If you have a second violation, a third violation for knowingly hiring or employing an unauthorized worker, so this isn't just a casual mistake, it could be $27,000 per violation. And I wouldn't doubt it if these fine amounts are going to go up in this administration. So this is what I found online,
Wow.
recently. Yeah, that's huge.
That's a
So
lot of money.
$27,000. If you're like, oh, I'm pretty sure they're undocumented or they're not legally allowed to work in the United States, but they filled out the form and they gave me ID and I checked it. Oh, but I didn't really check that if that ID was actually them. So that's the other thing that a lot of undocumented workers will do is they'll use their friend's ID, their cousin's ID, who actually has authorization to work in the United States. And me being the HR person, the person that's, QCing the I-9 and completing it, just look at their ID and go, it kind of looks like you, even though I'm pretty sure it's not, but it went through. It even went through an e-verify. It may go through an e-verify. And so they may be using somebody else's name and ID to work. And so looking at the actual ID, their face, is very, very important. And then on top of that, you could also have arrests and criminal convictions for knowingly hiring or employing unauthorized workers. And these are huge on the rise right now. So now you've heard me mention a couple times this thing called e-verify. So e-verify is an online system from the government where you can electronically verify all the information that's in the I-9 form. And now it goes through a government system. I'm not going to lie, it's not a amazing system that's fun to get set up in, but it is easier now. When it first came out many moons ago, it was like, oh geez, you got to go through all these training courses and everything, and you still do. If you hired me to work at your company as the HR person, which by the way, I'm not interested in. But if you hired me and you said, okay, Wendy, you're going to be responsible for running our E-Verify system. We already have somebody else in there, but now we're going to add your name in there. I have to get certified, so to speak, on your system to prove that, yes, I know how to use E-Verify. I know what the fines are. I know what the rules are. I know what the rules of the I-9 are. And if the candidate who is now becoming a new hire passes the E-Verify system, then we're good to go. There's still a little bit of risk though, because like I said, if the candidate slash new hire gives you information after you've given them a conditional offer of an employment and they're using a fake ID, that ID, meaning they're borrowing somebody's ID, it's a real ID, it's just not them. If they are giving you information and it passes through E-Verify, you're still not 100% off the hook. You're pretty much off the hook, but if it doesn't look like them and it's clear as day that it doesn't look like them and ICE comes in, you're still going to get yourself in some hot water. So E-Verify, the cool thing is it's completely free to use. So I would encourage you to check that out. Now, it may be mandatory across the entire country soon for certain employers. We'll find out what's going on there. And it already is mandatory in 11 states. And so I'll tell you one thing, for example, I'm in the state of Florida, and it is mandatory in the state of Florida for if you have 25 or more employees. And there's a bill out there right now. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger for you to see. There's a bill in my state. Who knows if it's going to pass? There's bills all the time that never pass. But this was updated just a couple of weeks ago, this article, and it is listed in the slide deck as well. So you could check this out to find out, okay, what states are required to use E-Verify at this point in time. So I would encourage you to just, keep scrolling down this information to find out who's required to use E-Verify. And there's this chart here that was hopefully was updated because they just released this article on April 7th, so about 9 days ago. And so you could quickly look over this and see, all right, what states are required. So like I said here, Florida, all private employers with 25 or more employees must use E-Verify. Colorado, for example, only require public employers to use it. I'll go down and pick another one right here. Mississippi, all private employees must use E-Verify. Employers. So some companies already are required to use this. And then the rest of you, if you're, not listed on here, don't think you're completely in the clear, because that just may mean that there is possibly, a bill that's coming out. And so when I find out that there is, some kind of bill coming out or that it's been approved with any state, I'll make sure that I publish this on LinkedIn, which is where I'm on all day, every day. So if you're on LinkedIn, please definitely, make sure that you connect with me so you can share some information. But at Career Learning, we'll make sure that we're also doing ongoing education and finding out, okay, what can we do? A free way for you to also find out, Wendy, I don't have time to be looking at all this stuff. Go and connect with an employment attorney in your state or states that you operate in, including your remote employees, and just go and connect with their newsletter. So get an employment attorney in your industry, hopefully, and then in your state or state. So you might have to get a few of them and sign up to their newsletter. And that way they're doing the information and the research for you. And then it'll just come in your email that says, hey, E-Verify has been approved for this state or whatever it might be. Now, what do you need to do for E-Verify? If you're not already using E-Verify, I would look at these links right here where you would start enrolling in the E-Verify process. And so we won't go through this a great deal, but there is already, it says right here, the 3 steps. And so check that out. And then you could also send reminders and things like that to yourself as well. So I would also see if there is an E-Verify newsletter of some sort so that you can get emails from E-Verify to say, hey, things have changed or things have not changed. Because it can definitely be a way to save your sanity and not have to be checking, podcast or my newsletter or blogs or anything or LinkedIn all the time. I just love hooking up with employment attorneys. Let them do the work for me, and then it just comes right to my email is the best way that you can do it. So now the other thing that the reason I wanted to give you this checklist, which is right here, is to understand that you have to do the entire enrollment in one session. So get everything ready. If you decide to choose to go into E-Verify, get everything that's on this checklist ready and make sure that you understand that everything needs to be done at the same time. And so the checklist is things like your EIN, your federal tax number, your mailing address, total number of employees. If you have a North American industry classification code, and there's a few other things as well. And so I want to make sure that you understand that you need to get this ready first before you start enrolling as a user. And then you'll go through all of okay, our company's enrolled. Now I, as a user of E-Verify for this company, have to go through the little training and be ready. Now, if you're thinking, well, E-Verify is going to take all my worries away, it is going to actually eliminate a lot of your worries, because if if an employee, a new hire, can get through the E-Verify system, they're most likely legit, except for those little tiny cases that if somebody has stolen somebody else's ID or is borrowing their ID and they look like them, you still have to prove that you've done everything that you possibly can. So it's not just about HR or whoever's wearing the HR hat knowing how to use E-Verify. It's also about educating all the people that are involved in the hiring process. So know the process, educate yourself, educate your team. Many of you there might be 3 or 4 of you that are wearing a little bit of the HR hat, and you don't actually have an HR dedicated function in your organization, which means, guess what? You've just been promoted to human resources in addition to all your other responsibilities. So know the process and use the resources that they have. I put over here a screenshot from the E-Verify website of the upcoming trainings for existing users, which means you've already, went on and did that little checklist and enrolled. April 22nd, May 13th, and May 29th, there's going to be some free trainings from E-Verify. You're just going to need to enroll first. And so go back to this checklist, grab all that information and enroll. It will definitely help you go, all right, for the most part, I'll just throw out a stat, which is probably not a completely legit, 99% of my new hires are going to be legit because they went through this process. It's pretty hard to fool the E-Verify process. So what do you do now if ICE comes calling? You're like, I've done everything I possibly can. You need to understand the difference between a raid and an audit. And then you need to have a designated trained team to be the face of, I'm the one that's going to be talking to the ICE people. And then you also want to make sure you're training your managers, your operations team, your reception team, your security team, because they may be the ones that are getting, the visit first before maybe you're on vacation that day. So it's really important to know the difference between all this and have more than one person trained. So what's an audit? An audit is usually much more calm. You usually get 3 days, if not more, notice. They're initiated through a notice of inspection, which requires employers to produce all of their I-9 forms and any other additional records that are requested within 3 days. So yeah, great. You get the 3 days notice. If you don't have your act together and you don't have all your I-9s already scanned in, and they're all in paper form, which is fine, it's going to be a much more difficult process to gather all this information. You do want to see if the notice of inspection says I need them in paper, or I need them electronic. Depending what they need, you're going to have to convert them to paper or convert them to electronic, and 3 days isn't a heck of a lot of time. So I would suggest that you start scanning everything in now. It's easier to print everything, even though it's expensive, than it is to scan everything in. Raids are the opposite. They are highly disruptive. There's usually law enforcement involved, and they just show up and they say, we need everything right now. If ICE decides that you did not follow the rules of I-9 and or E-Verify, you may face an order to stop hiring people immediately without valid work permits, for example, or you might face some of those penalties. Like I said, $27,000 per incident. That's a lot of money that most of us do not have. So I want you to make sure you are putting together some kind of raid team. The raid team is much more disruptive. You could also use that raid team for an audit team, but the raid team is the one that you definitely want to be concerned with. Practice it just like a fire drill. What are we going to do? Practice, practice, practice. Contact an immigration and employment counsel, like I already mentioned. If you don't already have an attorney, an employment attorney, now is the time to find one, even if you're just tracking them online, signing up to their newsletters. But if you believe at all, any little tiny, part of your business might have some kind of ICE raid, I want you to get an immigration and employment counsel now. If you're going to a big company like Fort Harrison that I have here a link for, they probably are going to have immigration attorneys and regular employment counsels. Smaller practices may not have both, but they might be able to be a little bit more flexible and affordable for you. And then they're going to have referrals. So definitely check that out now. If there is a warrant, you have to monitor compliance with it. You don't have a choice, and make sure that you're tracking actions taken by the ICE agents. I do actually have an article here from Fort Harrison on how workplace raids, work and how you could be prepared. So if we have time in a few minutes, I will open that back up for you. But go through that link. I'm not an attorney, so I definitely want to make sure you know that that's coming from an attorney that has immigration attorneys and employment attorneys. And then you have to train all your staff not to talk to ICE agents. They need to say things like, I can't give you permission to enter. You must speak with my employer. Train them all the time. You're not allowed to enter, talk to my employer. I'm not allowed to speak to you, talk to my employer. And then what does that mean, my employer? Is it HR? Is it the owner? Is it, who is it? And so this is where I'm also saying, go back here and make sure that you have a designated and trained team so that they now know, okay, what do I do? Communicate with all your employees and your candidates too, to say, we use E-Verify or we use I-9s. This is the information that we're going to require for you. So if you don't already have a careers page, please get one. If you have a careers page where you put your job ads and some information about your amazing company benefits and workplace culture, this is also where you should gently but firmly put in there, we validate identification of all employees. Be prepared to use this I-9 form or be prepared to use the E-Verify. These are the forms, the IDs that we will or will not take. And then you can go all the way back to, not to make you dizzy here, but all the way back to this documentation here. Be proud of it, that you are a legit company and that you are requiring candidates to use all of these forms, especially if you're in an industry where your competitors, maybe don't do that because they are hiring illegally. Or let's face it, maybe you have hired unknowingly or knowingly illegally in the past. Now is the time to knock that off, because you are going to, possibly get an ICE raid or an audit. Make sure that you're telling all of your employees and candidates, here's our company policies on identification, I-9s, re-verification of identifications for in certain cases. Be clear on if you allow work visas or other special circumstances, and then determine through this team. I would encourage you to get a committee together right now. What are we going to do if we have to start firing people before or after an ICE audit or raid because we did a self-audit and we're finding some, concerns here, and that these people are not legally required or allowed to work in the United States? Are you going to pay them? Are you going to give them references? Are you going to give them severance? What are you going to do? And so before we go ahead and open it up to questions, and I'm more than happy to stay on, I do want to just show you this article here that was from Ford Harris about the Ford and Harrison about, how employers can be prepared to unfortunately deal with an ICE audit or a raid. So again, this isn't my audit. I am not an attorney, even though I feel like I play one on TV. And, I feel like I'm a lawyer half the time, and I kind of wish I just went and got that degree already too, but not prepared to go back to school. But I thought this was some really, really great information here about being prepared for, an ICE raid or an audit. You could really kind of treat them as the same. Just with the audit, you get a couple days note, you get an actual notice, and then a time period, which is usually 3 days of when everything's due. So an audit isn't any less scary than a raid, but a raid is boom right now, and there's usually law enforcement there as well. So I encourage you to check that out. With that said, do we have any questions?
Not yet. Anybody have any questions? Please put them in chat or question and answers. And I've included a link for the DEI Immigration and Politics on the Workplace. It is April 23rd through the 24th. It is 1 hour over 2 days, and we look forward to having you. We'd love to
Yeah.
get you.
Absolutely. And then we'll go over this a little bit more detail, but you have that information. I just wanted to highlight right here. If you do have a raid, ask for a warrant and make sure you get a point person, and then train all of your people, including your down to the receptionist who might be like, oh, I don't know what to do. I just let them in. And so, I mean, if you don't train them, how would they know, right? If you are listening to this after the fact, feel free to shoot me an email, connect with me on LinkedIn, and let me know if you have any specific questions, and we'll make sure that we address that in the upcoming training. With that,
Well, a
go
couple
ahead.
questions.
Sure.
Casey Peck asks, can we get the PowerPoint presentation? We've included it as a PDF on the resources tab down below. So if you click on that, you can find it there. How does Kimberly asks, how does an organization get on ICE's radar?
Oops, sorry. I think I don't 100% know that answer, but what I do know, just based on industries that I worked in, they usually go after certain industries first, industries that in the past and currently would hire people that are not authorized to work in the United States. So definitely, a lot more manual labor, things like that, farming, manufacturing, little bit of construction, depending on not legit construction companies. But then a lot of it also is based on zip code too. And so, depending on in your zip code, are there a lot of immigrants in that zip code? If they are, then everybody's probably going to be open to be on an ICE raid or an ICE audit. So mom and pops, you're not off the hook either, because in the past, maybe ICE wouldn't go after, a mom and pop because they said, they have 2 employees. I'm not going to go after them. They're not worth it. With this administration, trends are probably not something we should be just focusing on. We should be focusing on everything. And so if you think that you have anybody that might be illegal as a worker, go through the I-9 process, figure out what are we going to do. Even if you know, and you don't have to admit it to me, but even if you do know, I know we have a few people that are illegal. I didn't really do an I-9 for them, and we're paying them off the books. Paying them off the books still doesn't, it might be like, oh, they're not an employee because we're paying them under the table. Yeah, that's not the way ICE is going to look at it. So the way you pay them doesn't necessarily matter as well. So come back to our training and we'll get into this a little bit more in detail.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if there are no more questions, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to have one of these a week, all sorts of different topics from career learning. And we'd appreciate your business on career learning, and like to see you at Wendy's session coming up next week on April 23rd. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Wendy, for doing this. This has been
Take
fabulous.
care. Have a great week.